Hey guys, long time no see. I may look a little different, but it's still me. Imagine one cold winter afternoon. You're looking for something to listen to while you go on your daily 2-mile walk with your dog. You open Spotify because you know you get 10 hours of audiobooks included in your premium subscription. Not sponsored. The new month has just begun. You scroll down and see this recommended to you. The only other audiobooks that you've listened to on Spotify are half of Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin, 3/4 of Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, and quite literally 2 minutes of The Body Keeps the Score by Basil van der Kolk. How could this be the next logical conclusion to that series of novels? I had no other choice. I had to read Morning Glory Milking Farm by C.M. Nascosta. Before we get into the actual plot of the novella, I wanted to introduce you to the author, C.M. Nascosta. So C.M. Nascosta is their pen name, and there's very little information about her online. Like, yes, she is active on Tumblr and Instagram, but overall she's still fairly private. I couldn't find her real name. I couldn't find really anything about her. So what do we know? Well, let me read her back cover biography for you all. C.M. Nascosta is a USA Today bestselling author and professional procrastinator from Cleveland, Ohio. She's always preferred beasts to boys, the macabre to the milquetoast, the unknown darkness in the shadows to the Chad next door. She lives in a crumbling old Victorian with a scaredy cat dachshund, where she writes non-traditional romances featuring beastly boys with equal parts heart and heat, and is waiting for the Hallmark Channel to get with the program and start a paranormal lover series. But yes, like I said, very little is shared about her personal life beyond her work. Admittingly, when I first found her, I really thought I was looking at just like in general AI generated content. Like, I thought she was a fake author, and I thought this book was fake, and I thought this cover was fake. I thought it was all AI because it's everywhere nowadays, unfortunately. You know, like I really thought it was like a ploy, like one of those money laundering schemes, where, like, you know, those hacks on TikTok where they're like, want a disposable income where you don't have to do any of the work? Just put this into AI and generate a whole novel and post it online and on Amazon, and you can buy it, and then you can make a ton of money without having to do any work. Like, that's what I thought this was. However, after scrolling a bit on like Instagram and TikTok and Tumblr, CM is obviously very real. Like, there's videos of her speaking online and doing meetups at cons and things like that. And she's even spoken out against using AI on her Tumblr, saying, quote, "I think AI is extremely harmful to, well, just about everyone. Artists, writers, translators, voice actors. People are so excited by the technological possibilities that the human impact is being completely overlooked," end quote. And personally, I completely agree, and I'm just thankful that some people still have some sense in this world about AI. So CM's whole brand is called Monster Bait, which is an obvious play on the words monster and masturbate, because she writes spicy books about monsters. Monster fucker books. Now, if you watch some of my other videos, you may know how I feel about monster fucking in general. This? It's not always my thing. However, it can be sometimes, I guess. And if you think that these books, the ones that CM writes specifically, the Monster Bait books, are like any other monster fucker books, you're gonna be very wrong. So first of all, Sam doesn't see her books, or this book specifically, as erotica, but rather romance. An anonymous user on Tumblr asked, quote, "Maybe a silly question, but if you don't write paranormal erotica, what do you write? Isn't erotica a book focused on fun, sexy times?" End quote. CM responded, quote, "I write romance. Morning Glory Milking Farm, for example, is pretty much a paint-by-numbers, small-town cozy romance. Its premise is bonkers and the heat level is very high, but the story structure is classic romance. The difference between romance and erotica usually comes down to what drives the plot. In erotica, the sex is the story. Romance focuses on the characters and the relationship, and any steam that exists is ancillary to the main plot, not the reason for it," end quote. So according to CM, she does not write erotica, but rather romance. However, according to Amazon, Morning Glory Milking Farm, the very book we are talking about today, and that she references in that aforementioned Tumblr ask, is ranked #1 in science fiction erotica, #1 in erotic science fiction, and #1 in fantasy erotica on the Kindle store. So even if CM doesn't view her work as erotica, which is totally valid, it seems her readers do, and I do see validity to both sides. So Collins Dictionary defines erotica as, quote, "works of art that show or describe sexual activity and that are intended to arouse sexual feelings," end quote. I feel the latter portion of this definition is the most important part of it. Erotica is intended to arouse sexual feelings. The definition of romance, on the other hand, is definitely a bit more broad. Masterclass cites the Romance Writers of America and their definition of a romance novel, saying it, quote, must have a central focus on the development of a romantic relationship between two people. The other criteria for a romance novel is that it must have an emotional through line and build to an optimistic conclusion. Based on these two definitions, I believe that Morning Glory Milking Farm fits nicely in the middle. It's definitely a romance, and the plot relies on the relationship between the two main characters and the development of said relationship, which ultimately does build to a positive conclusion. However, the way that it is written is absolutely meant to arouse sexual feelings, like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So in my humble opinion, it is both erotica and romance. Women contain multitudes. So second of all, CM does attempt to put social themes in her work. On her social media, CM is very adamant about her political views and obvious disdain for Trump and the Trump administration, or Trump regime rather. On February 6, 2025, CM used the orange emoji and the clown emoji to refer to Trump, and this was in a caption for one of her Readings Not Political posts, where she counters the trend of Booktok and Bookstagram users saying that reading is not political. In these posts, CM will feature one of her novels and explain how they are political. For example, regarding Morning Glory Milking Farm, CM says that it is, quote, about the literal commodification of the body, selling oneself in the name of upward mobility, dehumanization, and the crippling cost of higher education in the USA-like universe, end quote. And for our little analysis / review of the book that comes later in the video, I will reference this specific quote a lot, almost as a small thesis. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through the plot. But I believe now is as good a time as any to jump into the plot synopsis of CM Nascosta's Morning Glory Milking Farm. So the book opens on our protagonist, Violet, viewing a training video for Morning Glory Milking Farm. According to the job listing, says Violet, quote, no experience necessary, on-the-job training provided, 2 weeks vacation, and full benefits, including dental, end quote. Violet is a human woman about to turn 26, living in the city of Bridgeton. She's a graduate student facing financial hardship due to student loans and working in the nonprofit sector. Am I saying that right? Nonprofit sector. Recently, her family has offered to have her move back into their family home to help her find her footing, but Violet is reluctant because she sort of views that as a failure. This offer from her family, though, triggers her, however, to accept the milking technician position at Morning Glory Milking Farm, since the pay and benefits are just that good. We soon learn exactly what a milking technician is. So you see, Morning Glory Milking Farm is basically a pharmaceutical company that collects minotaur semen to basically make human Viagra because their semen is that powerful. I'm not gonna go too much into a lot of the erotica and sex stuff in the book because I don't know how much I can say, but I think I could talk about Viagra. So to be clear, while the minotaurs are bull people, there are no udders being milked, if you catch my drift. Violet takes a lot of time to describe what she sees in the training video, and she wonders if the minotaurs that are seen in this training video truly reflect the type of clientele that comes into the facility, or if they're just sort of putting their best people forward, their best bull forward to, really entice the new employees or potential employees. Regardless, Violet is intrigued and she goes to sleep thinking about her future, very turned on. So Violet does decide to take the job and she goes to the on-site training at the facility, and Violet at this time is the only human that works there. In this universe, there's all different types of species living together, human and non-human fantasy type races, but generally they're sort of segregated in their own communities. So there's some predominantly human communities and some predominantly non-human communities, and there's very little overlap between them. Cambric Creek, where this story takes place, is one of those predominantly non-human species communities, and that's where Morning Glory Milking Farm is located. Some of the other species that sort of appear in the universe include Mothmen, goblins, orcs, tieflings, and more. As Violet goes through her training, we learn that the milking process is quite sterile and clinical. While humans may view this as sex work, the non-human species do not. We learn that some of the other species in the universe, like werewolves, go through heat, and so many people will work seasonal positions as heat technicians. So it's pretty common in the non-human sphere to be working these sort of positions that entail sex, but in a clinical way, mostly to benefit the humans, if that makes sense. Also, at one point, there's this bug woman. Her name's Kirame. She trains Violet. She says thank the goddess, which implies that there is at least one religion that exists beyond our Abrahamic monotheistic religion in our universe, which is not really expanded upon. Like a lot of the other people will be like, thank the goddess, thank Dagda. So like, I'm not really sure like what the religious relationship to these people, but just know that there's at least a goddess and then a god named Dagda. So there's at least two. Anyway, we learned that the goal of the job is a plentiful, speedy collection for every client. Violet has her first training experience, and this is neither here nor there, but we learned that minotaurs have foreskin. I don't know why that's relevant necessarily, but I did write it down in my notes. So there's that. Some uncut representation for you all. Anyway, the earner that Violet helps her trainer milk ends up producing 24 ounces of milk. And this creates the baseline for Violet's experiences at the facility. She'll often harken back to the 24 ounces, being like, I can't help but imagine 24 ounces. I can't help but just think about 24 ounces, you know, when she's like alone at night. Violet's week of training goes very quickly, and she spends a lot of time studying the manuals and training videos. And she tells us that there are essentially 4 different clients. The aforementioned earners, who are usually fairly professional, tend to produce a lot of milk and therefore earn a lot of money because all of the minotaurs that come in to produce are paid for their production. There are the clock watchers. They are the ones that sort of want to get in and out pretty quickly. There's the pop and goes, which are kind of like the casual minotaurs that show up like every once in a while. Not too much to say about them. We don't really encounter a lot of them in the story. And then finally, there's the good little cows. And these clients tend to like to push the fantasy of being milked and definitely view it more in a sexual manner. For example, some of them may request their technician to wear a certain type of scrub, like maybe denim overalls or like a milkmaid's outfit. So it's definitely like a kink thing for them, but they tip well. So it's okay. So far, Violet's really only been observing and she hasn't had like the hands-on experience. Kirame, her trainer, finally lets her do one by herself, and it's a clock watcher. Violet does really well and does get turned on in the process. Dirty girl, dirty, dirty girl. In fact, she gets so turned on that when she gets home, instead of doing any of her errands or chores, she chooses to masturbate. I mean, monsterbate. Violet begins sort of settling into her role, and she's starting to feel a little bit more comfort financially. One day, Violet gets requested by a client, and turns out the minotaur that requested her was that clock watcher, her first like real client. At the beginning of their appointment, they make small talk, which is unusual for most of the clock watchers. And during the session, they get really sort of like carried away. Like it's professional, but they're like having a little fun and enjoying it slightly too much, if you know what I mean. So after the collection, Violet feels guilty after being turned on so much by this client, and she thinks about requesting not to be requested by him. But then she finally gets a glance at his face, and she realizes that this minotaur is actually kind of attractive. And while she doesn't feel the need to tell her supervisor about not working with him anymore, there still is a bit of guilt towards being attracted to him. So when she gets home, she does end up masturbating to him again. And she says, quote, trying to imagine the mess 24 ounces would make of her sheets, end quote. So Violet checks in with her mom while exploring Cambric Creek during her lunch break. This call solidifies to Violet that she definitely does not want to move back home, and that Morning Glory Milking Farm is a necessary step in order to obtain her future goals. She has another appointment with the aforementioned clock watcher, who purposefully chose her last slot of the day for a chance to spend a little bit more time with her. And they spark up more conversation during their appointment, and the minotaur shares that almost all male minotaurs donate their milk and that there are multiple facilities in the area. In this moment, Violet starts to put it together that it is conversation that turns on this particular minotaur, and so they legitimately start flirting back and forth, and Violet gets really horny. And I'm not going to read it to you, but I just needed you to know that she is really horny. After she gets the collection, the minotaur recommends that she try a local coffee shop called the Black Sheep. And then she gets home that night and she feels like a sort of pang of sadness in her chest, and she does some self-reflection, and she realizes that she is fairly happy with her situation at the moment, and that the pang of sadness is coming from the fact that she won't see the clock watcher for a whole week. Damn, she down bad. She down bad. So the next day, Violet does visit the Black Bean Beanery, and while waiting for her coffee, Violet gets like swept away by this vampire woman named Galis. I think that's how you say it, Galis. They also call her Gilly sometimes, so I will go back and forth between those two. Anyways, in an attempt to avoid someone at work, Gilly pretends that Violet is an old friend, but they end up genuinely sparking up like a real connection and chatting beyond like the distraction. And this will become important later. Gilly works at a vampire restaurant where they serve ethically sourced blood for vampire diners. So it's sort of like Morning Glory Milking Farm in a way, where humans and other anthropomorphs will donate their bodies for money. And so Violet and Galis sort of bond over their similar jobs. Back at work, Violet looks over her favorite clockwatcher's file, trying to infer things about his life. She looks at his address, and she literally like takes a detour on her way home one day and like scopes out where he lives. Violet also notes that the clockwatcher is a Capricorn, and she also does some research on their traits and horoscopes. And I can't remember if I'm remembering this correctly, but Violet is a Taurus, and at one point she does make a joke that she's the bull where he's the goat, even though he's a bull. Anyway, I thought that was funny. So she gets to the coffee shop again to meet up with Galis, and as she's ordering her latte, there's a familiar voice that interrupts her to order with her order, if you know what I mean. And it's the clockwatcher. He ends up paying for both of their drinks, and during this encounter, we finally get a name reveal. His name is Rourke. Yes, Rourke. Rourke. It doesn't sound real when I keep saying it. Rourke. The barista asks if Rourke and L'Oreal are coming to her cookout, and Rourke does not confirm nor deny this. And Violet freaks out a little because, like, who the fuck is L'Oreal? After Rourke departs, Violet reunites with Galis, and Galis notes the obvious chemistry between Violet and Rourke. The next time Rourke goes to the facility and Violet is his technician, Violet asks about the ring in his nose, like, is it a cultural thing? Rourke reveals that in modern times, the ring in the nose is sort of like a wedding ring. It symbolizes marriage. I haven't mentioned it yet, but Rourke does have a ring in his nose. Could it be because of L'Oreal? In that moment, Rourke does state that he is divorced and he just hasn't gone to get the ring taken out because he's too busy. And it turns out that L'Oreal is actually Rourke's elf neighbor who has an orc boyfriend, so Violet's in the clear. After some time, Violet takes some time away from work due to her great aunt's passing, and Rourke expresses how he missed her while she was away and that he was happy to see that she did not just quit and leave the facility. After that session, which Rourke notes was especially pleasurable this time, Rourke asks Violet to grab coffee with him. She accepts and they return to the Black Sheep Beanery, and Rourke ends up officially asking Violet out, and she says yes, of course. And Violet does some internet stalking and does find his ex-wife online and notes that she looks vaguely human but with a cow tail, which is interesting. Violet and Rourke go on one date that we, the reader, don't really get to be a part of, and she does share that he walked her to her door afterwards and kissed him, but they did not have sex. Boo. Boo. Tomato, tomato, tomato. That does leave Violet slightly disappointed, but she does enjoy how gentlemanly he is. Okay, so actually they didn't just go on one date, they went on 2 dates that the reader doesn't really get like to be a part of. So on the second date, Violet and Rourke run into L'Oreal at a bar, whom Violet does take an immediate liking to, which is good. Violet ends up offering to pay for half of their meal, but Rourke objects. He says, quote, "I'm in the position to comfortably spoil someone, so when you're with me, I'm spoiling you. End of story." End quote. This, as you can guess, turns Violet on, of course. Okay, so they didn't just go on 2 dates that the reader didn't really get to be a part of. They went on like 6 dates and no sex. They make that very clear that they did not have sex for like the first half dozen dates. Additionally, out of respect, Rourke does stop going to the facility while he is dating Violet. So all of these factors made Violet very, very horny, as you can guess. Gilly waxes Violet's vagina, and frankly, I won't stand for the anti-Bush propaganda in this monster fucker book because, like, I'm sorry, you want to fuck a minotaur, but you're worried that he won't find your pubic hair attractive? Like, I'm sorry, what universe are we living in that you need to wax your vagina for a fucking minotaur guy? Like, come on. That's the most unrealistic thing about this book, that you would wax her bush for a minotaur. Are you kidding me? It's a minotaur. He has fur. Guys, oh, come on. Anyways, Rourke and Violet go to this very nice restaurant, and Violet is not wearing panties. He ends up finger blasting her in the middle of the dining room because, of course. Violet does know that there's not many people around in the dining room and that it's like dark and quiet, but still, like, my God, this scene goes on for so long. Violet finishes and they finish their dinner, and Violet invites him back to her place, and he goes and they start a little foreplay. However, he does cut it off, saying that her human apartment can't really handle him, and he tells her to pack a weekend day bag for Friday and he will take her to his place after her work is over. over, but he did end up finger blasting her again and eating her out before going home though. So Violet didn't end up completely unsatisfied. Remember when I was like, oh, I'm not gonna go too in detail about any of the sex stuff, but like, that's the plot, babe. It's for education. So that Friday comes around and their big date is going to be at the vampire restaurant that Galis works at. And during their appointment at the facility before their big date, Violet notes that she realizes just how little sex has to do with their relationship, since at this point they haven't technically had sex. Like, yes, they've done other things, but there hasn't been any. He hasn't penetrated her yet. So regardless, Rourke and Violet note that they have a genuine connection that could potentially result in a future together. And so Rourke ends up leaving her appointment early to save it all for Violet later. Hey, I know that's right. Violet visits his house before their late night reservation and they get right into it. Violet says that she, quote, feels like an Athenian sacrifice, end quote. And Rourke confirms that the Minotaur in ancient Greece actually did fuck the sacrifices. And that's why they never came out of the labyrinth, because they enjoyed fucking the Minotaur so much. They stayed. As Rourke says, they were, quote, addicted to the way they were fucked by the bull, end quote. And in this moment, Violet understands exactly what he means, as they finally have sex. After that, we get a big time jump, and Violet and Rourke are enjoying domestic life together as a couple. Violet is in the running for a new job in her field, which would mean she could move to Cambric Creek, get out of the city, and move closer to Rourke. Maybe even with Rourke. Who knows? Violet asks Rourke if he would like her to quit Morning Glory Milking Farm, and he says no, that he would be an asshole to insist that she quit her job for him. She decides that with the new position, if she gets it, she would still do about 2 shifts at the farm to go towards credit card debt, which is practical. And Violet tells her mom that she's dating a Minotaur, and she takes it almost exactly how you would think a human mother would take it. And we get some more glimpses into Violet and Rourke's life as a couple, and it is very sweet and healthy. And Violet does end up getting the job and tells Rourke that she's going to sign for the apartment in Cambric Creek. And that's it. That's the end of the book. So this is sort of going to be like an analysis / review section. Like, it's an erotica book, so like there's not like a ton to analyze, but I do feel like there's some things there, especially since CM sort of was marketing it with a political lens, and like everything is political, blah, 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 blah. But also like it's a little bit of a review because I can. So for this section, I wanted to focus on 3 main things: audience, genre, and theme. Anyway, let's start with audience. The audience for this book, I feel, is very obvious. I feel like monster fucker books in general have a pretty specific particular audience. Like, I think we can all picture who. It's usually like older Gen Z millennial women who, you know, were like bookish nerds when they were little, maybe like outcasts, and are now usually lean towards more alternative lifestyles. I do think that this particular book is not necessarily as hardcore alternative facing in a way, because it's very fluffy, very like girl next door type vibe. So I feel like it kind of meets in the middle. I think you should just listen to the first part of the plot summary on the back of the book to like kind of understand what I'm trying to say. Quote, Violet is a typical down on her luck millennial, mid-20s, overeducated and drowning in debt, on the verge of moving into her parents' basement, end quote. So this book is definitely catered towards millennial women that were probably formerly in the gifted program but are now experiencing burnout in the real world and are looking for some escapism, because that is essentially who Violet the character is. And I think, especially with a lot of these types of romance erotica books, the author's goal is to have their readers really identify and be the protagonist, the point of view character, if you will. And Violet really does pride herself on her specificity and work ethic throughout the book, telltale signs of a former gifted kid. Not to mention, she recently got her master's degree from a liberal arts school in art history, and Violet even has brown curly hair, like every other, not like other girls protagonist, who's like kind of nerdy and bookish. So I feel like this definitely does not necessarily lean into like the alternative scene of like the monster fucker community, but more so like the more shy, bookish girls that are looking for love. I literally swear that CM took every nerdy outcast trope and rolled it into one character to write Violet. And unfortunately it works, because like who else is gonna read this book? Plus, the romance slash erotica of this book is low-key like a CEO fantasy, like someone to take care of them. And like, who else but a burnt out millennial woman who fantasizes about a rich man taking care of her is going to buy this book? So if that sounds like you, I got the perfect book for you to read. And I think it makes sense that CM made her protagonist a very specific kind of character, but is still relatable to like a larger niche of the general public, because monster fucker books aren't for everyone. But this isn't a monster fucker book, remember? It's a monster bait book. And like, honestly, this book is fairly tame. And I think it's like the perfect book for someone to like be introduced to the monster fucker genre, because like the Minotaur is really just like a larger dude with a bull head. He's like a little bit hairy. Like the anatomy is still pretty much the same as it is described, except they're just a little bit bigger and he's got a bull head and he's got a lot more fur. But like, honestly, there's crazier books out there. Moving on to genre, we talked a little bit earlier about whether or not this book should be considered erotica or romance, and CM is firm in her belief that it is a romance, but it feels like it's being marketed and consumed as an erotic novel in distribution. And my stance still is that it is somewhere in the middle. And I kept my plot synopsis like fairly PG-13, I feel, but I cannot underestimate the numerous descriptions of bull penis that are in this book. And it's not just in a clinical fashion, even though like the whole point of it is that it is a clinical facility. No, Violet is like constantly getting aroused by the penis, which is clearly meant to elicit some sort of erotic response in the reader, or else like, why else would it be included in that way? It's sort of hard to separate the sterility of the facility and the non-sexiness of the job if most of the time we see Violet on the job is with Rourke and they're the main love interests of the book. Like, we get a few glimpses here and there of some of the other clients and how Violet doesn't view them as sexy, but like I said, most of the time we are at the farm, we are just seeing Violet and Rourke, or it is Violet thinking about Rourke while working on other clients. Regardless, I think it's silly to claim that this book isn't erotic at all, but I think it's also silly to say that it isn't romantic. Like, let's recall the definition of romance that we used earlier. The Romance Writers of America say a romantic novel, quote, must have a central focus on the development of a romantic relationship between two people. The other criteria for a romance novel is that it must have an emotional through line and build to an optimistic conclusion, end quote. This is very true of Morning Glory Milking Farm. From the moment we meet Rourke, Violet has a connection with him, and that connection is reciprocated. While there is a plot of Violet trying to get back on her feet after falling on hard times, that's just supplemental to the plot of her falling in love with Rourke. It's actually the catalyst for the relationship in many ways. Like, it's what leads Violet to take the job at the farm, and in the end, it's Rourke's connections in Cambric Creek that help Violet get her dream job. All of that being said, at the heart of this novel is Violet and Rourke falling in love. It's a bit of a will they, won't they plot, if you will. There is an emotional through line as we see Violet and Rourke get closer and let their guards down about their pasts and hardships. Violet about her finances, and Rourke about his divorce and childhood. And finally, we do get an optimistic conclusion, since they do end up together. They don't get married or move in together or anything like that, but it feels more realistic in that way. And it's more in the line of the reality of the audience of millennial women. Like, marriage rates have been rapidly declining, and it makes sense that a millennial romance wouldn't necessarily end in marriage, especially for ones that are catered to perhaps ultra independent, bookish, art history nerd feminists. So again, I fear that this book is both erotica and romance. Finally, themes. Remember, in an Instagram post, CM said that Morning Glory Milking Farm is about, quote, the literal commodification of the body, selling oneself in the name of upward mobility, dehumanization, and the crippling cost of higher education in the USA-like universe, end quote. And this is true, but it's not the overarching theme of the book. It's definitely an undercurrent, and I say this because the book isn't literally about the commodification of the body or selling oneself in the name of upward mobility. It's about Violet and Rourke falling in love. It's a romance. They just happen to be falling in love in a world where species have to sell their body to live. And we are reminded many times throughout the novel that the non-human species do not see the milking farm or vampire restaurants or seasonal heat technician positions or anything like that as sex work. They look at it with neutrality. Is it because they have no other choice? Sure. But CM doesn't always necessarily frame it in a negative way. It sort of just is like how the universe works, which mirrors ours in many ways too, you know, living under capitalism. I think if CM wanted us to look at it more negatively, Violet would leave the farm at the end after finally hustling hard enough to not have to work there anymore. But she doesn't. she stays because she wants to. Like, yes, she's paying off credit card debt, but she makes it sound like it's not a necessity, if you know what I mean. Again, I do think that all of those ideas are in the book, but I don't think that's what the book is about. We spend more time reading about the tip of Rourke's bull penis than we do about the dehumanization of the clients in the facility. In one instance, an older Minotaur comes in and tells Violet that he's trying to pay for his child's tuition at university. Violet thinks, quote, every Minotaur who came in with a ring through his nose left her wondering if he had a new baby at home, a family vacation to save for, a down payment on a house. She long ago accepted that Kirame was right. This wasn't sex work, not for the employees. But she realized that it likely wasn't for the bulls who visited the farm either, at least not for many of them. Humans have commodified us. End quote. Then, the next page, she's stroking Rourke's penis, so women contain multitudes, I guess. I appreciate CM trying to make this more than just another monster fucker book, and really trying to stick it to the man by having not so subtle commentary on our current economy and political climate. However, I feel like that commentary gets overshadowed or even undermined by the fact that it is erotica. Again, like I said, all of those themes and ideas are present throughout the novel and sort of serve as the undercurrent subtly pushing the plot along, but at the center of the novel is Violet fantasizing about being ravished by Rourke's giant bullcock. I don't want to say that politics and erotica can't mesh. And like, I do agree that reading is political and that art can't be separated from the artist because the artist is always influenced by the politics of their outer world. However, all of that being said, we should also have a conversation on whether or not using politics in this way is productive. And I'm not too entirely sure myself. And I think the main theme of this novel is along those lines, just in a more general way. Like, how far are you willing to go? How far are you willing to go to avoid moving in with your parents? How far are you willing to go to please your client and get the most plentiful, speedy collection? And how far are you willing to go to let that but what do you think? I really did want to go into this yucking someone else's yum, but I can't do that because it has become my yum. Like, I know I just did like a whole rant on like things that I had problems with the book, but I did genuinely enjoy it. And it's true, when I first saw the cover of the audiobook when it was recommended to me, I did not have very high expectations. I clicked on it because I thought it was going to be bad and I was going to make fun of it. YouTube and the internet in general really respond to negativity. So it seemed like a decent investment of time. Read a bad but silly book, make fun of it online, maybe get some engagement, and move on with my life. And I even had a theory that it was like partly AI generated, and I was excited to find out whether or not my theory was true. But I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. Not only does CM seem like a genuine and passionate writer with morals that seem to align with mine, I also sort of enjoyed the book. So I can't sit here and make fun of this book or CM in earnest. I just can't. While I still don't think that Minotaurs are necessarily my thing, and I do have some issues with the book, I would maybe peruse some of her other writings. For example, I did find that CM wrote a Regency-inspired story with a gargoyle lover, and it's definitely in my cart, ready to be purchased when I am ready. I'm not joking. The moral of the story here, I guess, is quite literally, don't judge a book by its cover, and keep an open mind, just like Violet. Wow, what a doozy. If you would like me to read more books of this nature, let me know. I will do it for you. Well, this one I did it for myself, but I will do it for you too. Remember to like, subscribe, comment. I know it's been a while. I meant to post this video back in May, but May got super busy with the show and whatnot. I'm here now and that's all that matters. Okay, mommy's back. 2 months ago, I posted a poll that said, do you like/read romantasy? 42% of you said, yes, I read it and I like it. 38% said, yes, I've read it, but I don't particularly like it. 21% of you said, no, I don't read romantasy books. Is this a romantasy book? Maybe. Who's to say? Let me know in the comments below what you think. I'm planning to do some more like let's plays again, so if there's any games you want me to play, let me know and I'll do it. Big love. What's even my outro? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.